Hi, this is Hank with Amada Senior Care Hoboken. This is part two of our series with my good friend Curtis. Today, he's going to share with us his story about his dad, Bill, and his experience in an assisted living facility. Curtis, thanks for joining. Can you tell us a little bit about your dad?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me. So happy to be a part of this and hopefully help people who are going through similar situations. So, my dad, Bill, was in his 80s, just about probably 81, when we noticed a pretty significant decline in his ability to care for himself. And we had probably watched it, to be honest, with ourselves for a couple years. And that was, anything from was he cooking for himself? Could he get around? He was still driving in his early 80s. And then we did have a couple unfortunate situations where we found him essentially unresponsive in the house due to probably a lack of eating and or caring for himself. And a couple unfortunate 911 calls later, you realize, all right, this person can no longer care for themselves.
So
And
did
they
he
need
did he
help.
fall?
He fell. Yeah,
Okay.
fell a couple times, and my sister found him luckily, and was able to get help, and that's when you have a serious conversation around, okay, this is time to make a change.
Right. And when he fell, did he like break anything, break a hip, or was he unscathed?
We did find out actually sometime later he broke ribs. Yeah, he did
Okay.
end up breaking a couple ribs, not a hip, luckily, which is a pretty severe, but
Serious. Yep.
yeah, but he did break a couple ribs falling. And my dad was, as I indicated by his age, he was a very tough man, kind of raised in that generation of, you don't
I
admit pain.
remember. Your
Yeah, you
dad's
don't
tough.
admit pain, you smile and you kind of move on, and he's very stoic. So yeah, it was not easy for him when we kind of had the conversation about, figuring out different ways to get him care.
At that time, did you know he had dementia?
We had maybe an inkling to understand that like he was forgetful, and that's I think maybe what every I think family goes through. Like it turns into forgetfulness,
Right.
and you don't quite understand the severity of maybe what the parent is going through. Because in our particular case, my father would never admit to anything.
He wasn't a big talker anyway, so
New. There was not a lot of talking about feelings or how he was doing.
right, right. So the condition kind of crept in, but you weren't fully, you didn't get him diagnosed at the time.
No, no. I think it was probably, a couple years later, maybe it was 83, 84, when it was clearly, diagnosed by his doctor that there's, dementia here and it's advancing.
Got it. Got it. But that wasn't until after he was in a facility?
It was probably pretty close to a year or so after he had entered assisted living.
Got it. Got it. And then what was that decision process like with your sister and your father?
Yeah, that was difficult. My dad was cognitively, in a pretty good spot before we had put him in or asked, for a decision to go to assisted living, and he was not a fan of it. Did not agree with it. Felt he was able to care for himself. In general, did not like the facility we had chosen for him. And my sister and I were at the time doing our best to almost convince him that this was the best step forward.
Right.
And then even I actually had some really challenging conversations with him because it wasn't his choice. He was not really looking forward to it, to be fair.
And so did you ever think about having a caregiver with him instead of going straight to a facility?
Yeah, we did, and I referenced it in our first conversation. We did have someone who was a family friend who would check in on him from time to time. And again, after having gone through a couple falls at nighttime when no one was there,
Oh, at night. Okay.
it was, the realization that he needs more consistent
Right.
care. And
24/7
part of
care.
it, and part of it too is also his ability to really even just cook for himself
Right.
and
Right.
eat. And something as you don't really think about those things. My dad never really cooked anyway that I can recall growing up as a child. And then you realize he's in his 80s and he's trying to do this by himself, which is go to the market, try to come up with a menu, and try to figure out how to cook for himself. It wasn't something he was skilled
Right.
at.
Right. Right. And so what was your decision making process from a financial perspective?
I mean, it was similar to my mom's, which was my dad had Social Security. We didn't really have any savings. My dad did not have any savings, and so we were limited with what we could do. And so I ended up, supplementing a good portion of his care when we were able to find a location that was close to my sister and what we felt offered the care he needed. And to be fair, in a facility that we, looked at and felt it was a place that he could adjust to.
Right. And just to clarify, did he go to a skilled nursing facility or an assisted living facility?
It was assisted living, and they also had a part of there was care, memory care.
Memory care unit.
Yeah.
And he went directly into the memory care, or did he go?
No, he was in assisted living throughout actually his entire experience there.
Oh, so he never went into the memory care side.
No. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you think about the quality of the care at the facility?
I mean, it was a bit different in the sense that my dad, different from my mom. My mom was, as I mentioned earlier, bedridden. And so my dad could get up and walk down the hall and, go to have his meals. And I would say the first year to 2 years was pretty difficult for him. My dad, in general, was not a social person. He did not see any upside in trying to get to know people at the facility. So it felt very lonely, I think. And what I actually came to find out, probably, gosh, 3, 4 years into him being there, was he'd actually made some pretty good connections. And I was surprised by that. It's nothing that he ever spoke to, but I only found out because as I was having lunch with him one time, other people in the area started talking to me about who I was and what I did for a living and how I grew up. And it only made me realize my dad had actually been talking to these people and sharing stories, which was a good upside.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, as far as the care relative to, we talked about your mother's care in a skilled nursing facility. Would you compare the care at the assisted living facility to be better, the same,
Yeah. You mean it was different in the sense
different?
of, yeah, the amount of care that he needed versus my mom was very different. And what I mean
Right.
by that is, other than maybe giving him medication on a daily basis, they would check in to make sure that he had put himself to bed. There wasn't a high level of care needed. So, to say the care he was getting, it's not apples to apples to my mom because she needed so much more care. But I think it was okay. And even I'd say as he progressed and got older and dementia increased, um, I think in general there was a bit more consistency at this facility with the people who were there. And for the most part, many of the nurses there knew my dad, and so that helped. But again, because he didn't need the intensive care, I don't think that we ever really focused on his care, what he received. It was more an understanding that there were guardrails around how he would eat, how he would bathe, how he
Right.
would get dressed. And again, he didn't leave the facility unless my sister and I went there and maybe took him out to lunch or dinner.
Right. So it's much more of a clinical sort of
Yeah,
observation versus did
correct.
any of the caregivers show any compassion to your father?
Yeah, and again, there were some signs that people knew him or knew his likes and dislikes, and to me, I would bucket that under compassion because I generally tried to make sure that he was taken care of.
Right.
But we didn't run into the as many situations with him in the assisted facility that I felt were as dramatic as my mom, where I felt sometimes my mom wasn't looked at for hours on end, whereas I
Right.
felt like my dad had more consistency.
Right. And he's much more independent. So
Yeah,
the type of care is very different. Skilled care versus like, okay, did he get his meds? And your
yeah,
father, it wasn't, super a super emotional person. So
correct.
like, he's probably wasn't engaging with all of the staff
No,
as much as
yeah,
maybe your mother would have.
yeah.
Um, how did you feel about the whole situation, given that you were in Oregon and your father was in Southern California?
Yeah, I would think it was very similar to my mom. Anytime you're not able to help out or be there for your parent, it's challenging. Again, there's a tremendous amount of guilt that you feel, and again, knowing that my sister had to not only take care of my mom, who was in the long-term care facility, and then now my dad being in assisted living, and there was a overlap there. it was difficult. It was tough for her because she, as I mentioned earlier, worked and had a family, and so I would, try to be down there as frequently as I could, but the reality was, I could probably only be there 4 or 5 times a year, which didn't feel
Right.
like a lot.
Right. Right. This just clicked into my head because we've been talking about this very sequentially, but
Yeah.
no, I just noted in my mind, maybe I'm not that smart. Your parents overlapped, right?
Yeah.
Mom's in a facility, father's in a facility for how
Yeah.
many years?
They overlapped for at least 3 years.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
So that must have been really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy. And again, the care very different that they're receiving, and the type of care they're receiving very different.
Right, right. Were you able to like call your dad at least? I know your mother, she wasn't able to speak for a very long time, but were you able to
Yeah.
communicate by phone with your father?
Yeah, my dad had a cell phone, so we would talk often, usually on my way home from work. And then it probably his last year or so there, I set up a video phone so I could try to call him, but it never worked because he never wanted to talk and he would turn it off. So it
Sounds
failed.
like my dad.
Yeah, it failed.
All right. Last couple questions.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone going through a similar situation that your father went through?
Yeah, I think you've got to do your due diligence, for sure. I think assisted living, and whether it's that or skilled nursing, you really do have to spend the time interviewing facilities, going to different facilities, because you want to feel as confident as you can about where you're going to put your parent. And I think that we probably went through at least half a dozen facilities, and some of that depended upon cost per month, whether we could afford it or not.
Right.
Some just what's the overall feeling that we had about the facility director. We ran into a situation at my dad's facility where I think they probably went through 5 or 6 facility directors in a period of 5 years. So, it felt very transactional for them also, because you had so many new people coming in and out of the facility. So it didn't feel like a lot of consistency. And again, I'd always say this, and I should have probably said it in our first conversation. You have to give yourself a little bit of grace, and I do mean that because this isn't something that you probably ever thought you'd have to go through. I certainly did not growing up. I didn't really at any point think, okay, I'm gonna have to make sure I can take care of my parents. And the reality is maybe they weren't as willing to go through this process because it's not a place that they wanted to be. I don't know very many parents who have a dream of ending up in assisted living. It's a challenging situation, I think, across the board for an entire family.
Yeah, we see this all the time where there just aren't a ton of people planning for this stage of their lives. They don't think about it that thoughtfully.
Yeah,
And it ends up being like this belly flop into the pool,
yeah,
where people are scrambling to just figure out, okay, what are the finances? How do we pay for this? Finding like you yourself went and visited a bunch of facilities, which is a lot. Most
yeah,
people just say, okay, what's the closest one? Right?
yeah,
And not thinking about, you know, what you're talking about. What's the
yeah,
level of care? What's the consistency? Um, you know, how much does it cost? What are the benefits? Do they have a memory care unit? Like all these things that actually
yeah,
can really make a difference. And also, you had the luxury of like having six in your area, which is nice. You had something to
yeah,
choose from, right? Some
yeah,
people, it's like there's only one, right? And it's not
yeah.
great. So,
Yeah, I think, for sure what I'd say to people, because I have friends who will talk about, oh, my we think our dad has dementia and we think maybe we'd have to get him, into a facility. And I tell them immediately, start doing the research now.
yeah,
Because a lot of these facilities have wait lists 6 months, a year out. And no
yep,
one realizes that, like, oh my gosh, by the time they need care, you may have to wait 12 months to get that care. So if you don't know, immediately like, hey, I'm picking these one or two and these are my top two, you're out of luck. And
right.
that's a huge stressor for families. And I've seen that happen a couple times.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Yeah,
One of the facilities that is in my area, I talked to him about, do you have available beds? And he's like, I got one, and they're always at like
yeah,
95% occupancy, but
yeah,
they're not, not occupied for very long. They're trying
yeah,
to fill that bed,
yeah,
because they've got quotas to fill.
yeah,
And it's not always the right room either. Like oh, you don't want a two bedroom, you just want a one, like, oh, you just want a studio, like it may not be the right fit for whoever's trying to stay there.
Or your budget. I mean, that's a
That's right.
real stressor for families. Like care for
Absolutely.
care for seniors is expensive. I
It's
mean,
very expensive.
I still get sticker shock when I hear about friends of
It's
mine with
shocking.
families. Yeah,
It's
and I don't think,
shocking.
to your point, anybody realizes the cost of what it is, and then you're talking about Social Security or someone's house savings or equity, and it's just, yeah, it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, my discussions, I have a lot of discussions with people about home care versus assisted living facility. And, it's usually shocking when I tell them how much it costs to go to an assisted living facility in New Jersey.
Yeah,
Especially if you're high level of care, especially if you're going to a memory care unit. They just look at me going like, no, that's crazy, right?
yeah,
And it is crazy, but that's just the cost of doing business. That's how much it costs. And
yeah,
it's very unfortunate. I have to be the bearer of bad news many days a week when I educate people about, yeah, home care really, it's mostly going to come out of your pocket unless you got Medicaid, right? Or unless you have long-term care insurance, right? It's all private pay.
yeah,
And people are like, what? What are you talking about? Doesn't Medicare cover it? Not really, no. A couple
no,
hours a week if you need it for, a very short period of time, not
yeah,
really at all. So, anyway, last question. Any final
yeah.
takeaways you want to share? Or I know we've been going on for a while.
Yeah, no, I think we covered it. I think again, as I mentioned, it's a dynamic, very complex situation. I would always say to anybody who has an aging parent, have a conversation earlier rather than later with the parent in terms of what they want for themselves, and then hopefully that lines up to what you can provide for them. And do your research. It does take time to find a great spot for a parent, and the sooner you have an idea of what they want and what you're able to either afford or provide for them, the better. Because this is something that, unfortunately, I think in most cases, to your point, kind of creeps up on people very quickly, and then you're making very, very quick decisions, and
Yep.
that's
Yep.
difficult.
Well, Kurt, thank you for sharing your stories with us. I appreciate your time. And hopefully, these stories can let our viewers know that they're not alone in what they're going through. A lot of people in our age group have gone through this or going through caring for their aging parents. So, again, thank you for sharing your experience. And thank you for everyone for joining us. Talk to you soon. Thank you.